Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Kick off this work session. First item is a proclamation for the Historic Houses of Worship Tour. Pat Kelly is here, representative from the Hagerstown Religious Council. Would you come up forward, please? Excuse me if I cough. I've had this cold that's been lingering now for about a month. Hopefully, yeah, but now it's just a cough. All right, so the special recognition Historic House of Worship Tour. Whereas the Historic Houses of Worship Tour will be held on Thursday, December 26, 2019. And whereas the self-guided walking tours will run from 3 to 7 p.m. and will feature seasonal decorations and seasonal music along with historic and architectural interpretation. And whereas the tour includes 12 historic houses of worship, which include Christ Reformed Church, Congregation Benai Abraham, Grace United Methodist Church, John Wesley United Methodist Church, Otterbein United Methodist Church, Presbyterian Church of Hagerstown, St. John's Episcopal Church, St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church, St. Mark's Lutheran Church, Trinity Lutheran Church, Washington Square United Methodist Church, and Zion Reformed United Church of Christ. The tour also includes one historical building, the Miller House. And whereas brochures are available at the Hagerstown, Washington County Convention and Visitors Bureau prior to the event, and then will be available at each participating location the day of the tours. And whereas the 5th Annual Holiday Tour Photo Contest will take place during the 2019 tour. Attendees are encouraged to submit pictures to the gallery manager of the Washington County Arts Council, which highlight the beauty and architecture of the houses of worship. The winning original photograph will be used to create posters and promotional materials for the 2020 tour. Whereas it is events such as Historic Houses of Worship Tour, which make Hagerstown a great place to live, work, and visit. Now, therefore, I, Robert E. Brucci II, Mayor of the City of Hagerstown, Maryland, do hereby thank and recognize organizers of the Historic Houses of Worship Tour and encourage our citizens to take advantage and enjoy the local beauty of the season. So,
thank you so very much.
You want to say a few words?
I just want to say that we are honored and privileged to have this many historical houses of worship in our city. And in the 6 years that we've been doing the tour, we typically draw 200 to 300 people in each church. They either visit one or all of them, or they come back the next year and finish the tour. But it's a wonderful day in Hagerstown.
And all of them are beautiful, you know. So, and all within walking distance of each other. So yeah, it's a great day.
Yes.
So thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you.
All right. Eric, you want to get a picture? Can we get a picture for posterity?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, preliminary agenda review, as usual. Stop me if you have any questions. I'll call the meeting to order at 7 p.m. next Tuesday. We'll have the invocation. Either I'm going to do it or I will get someone. We'll have the pledge of the flag, announcements of the rules of procedure, all that good stuff. Meeting schedules for January are January 7th, 14th, and the 21st are all work sessions at 4 p.m. And then the 28th is a regular session at 7 p.m. We'll have an appointment to the Board of Zoning Appeals, agenda item for citizen comments, a public hearing, proposed comprehensive plan amendments. We'll adopt the minutes of November 5th, 6th, 12th, 19th, and 26th. On the consent agenda, under Parks and Engineering, the 2020 and 2021, man, my brain's not catching up to myself, yeah. The 2020 and 2021 pavement preservation program, under Utilities Department, light substation class vacuum circuit breakers from Siemens Industry Incorporated, Wendell, North Carolina, for $62,741. Under wastewater, miscellaneous facility repairs, Sinagro, WWT Inc., Baltimore, Maryland, $37,219.18. They couldn't shave that off. Under water, hydrofluorosilicic acid, George S. Coyne Chemical Company, Inc., Croydon, Pennsylvania, $51,763.50. Under unfinished business, the approval of an ordinance, Chapter 64, Building Construction, Article 3. Under new business, the approval resolution, parking lease for University District Parking Deck with the State of Maryland. The approval resolution, amendment to the commercial lease agreement with Fresh Academics LLC, Peter Arzamandi, of the property located at 60 West Washington Street. The approval of traffic pattern change on Dale Street area. The approval to renew citywide mowing contract, 3/15/20 to 12/15/20. The approval of user agreement with the Hagerstown Area Youth Soccer League, and the approval of a user agreement with the Hagerstown YMCA. Under general citizens' comments, city administrative comments, mayor and council comments, and then we will adjourn for the year.
Mr. Mayor, before you make arrangements for the invitation, talk to me. Pursuant to our previous conversations, I reached out and was told it was going to be taken care of.
Cool.
So I
All right,
anticipate
we'll
we'll
hook
work
up.
here.
Yep. Sounds good. Any questions? Great. All right, the fiscal year 19 comprehensive annual financial report, Michelle?
Good afternoon. Chris Lehman is here from SB and Company. I think many of you will remember. He was here last year about this same time. And he's here this evening. He's going to run through high-level comments and review of how our fiscal year 19 financial audit went. He may also have some additional comments this evening to go ahead and cover our CFA, which is our federal single audits, because we have been doing them. They are due in March of each year. So typically we do them later. We send out information on them, but we don't always have everything done at one time. This year we were able to accomplish that, so hopefully Chris will just give us a quick status update of that as well. Go ahead, Chris.
All right, well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, as Michelle said, I'm Chris Lehman with SB and Company, and what I'll do is I'll walk through the presentation that I've prepared. I'm sorry, I'm going to work from my copy too, because my eyes aren't that great. So, if you look on slide 6, this is the scope of services we were engaged to perform. We were engaged to audit the June 30, 2019 financial statements of the city, as well as the Uniform Guidance Single Audit. That's a federally mandated requirement for any governmental entity that expends more than $750,000 of federal funds per year, which the city meets that threshold. We also review the Uniform Financial Report, which is a form completed by management that's required to be submitted to the state upon issuance of the annual financial statements, which has been done and submitted, to my knowledge, on time to the state.
By October 31st.
Yep. And along with the single audit, which we've substantially completed, there's also a data collection form that's required to be submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, which acknowledges that the single audit's been completed. That current deadline's March 31st, and we're basically in the final stages of that audit. All the test work's done. We have no findings to report in the current single audit, and we're pretty much prepared to issue that report. And as well as we're available for year-round advice, or as questions come up, we make ourselves available to management as well as you guys as well. I have my contact information in the back of the presentation as well. The next slide, you'll see a summary of the results. On the financial statements, we've issued a clean or unmodified opinion on the financial statements. That's the best opinion we could give under professional standards. We discovered no instances of fraud through our fraud audit. We discovered no material weaknesses in any of the internal controls. We received the full cooperation of management. And then on an entity-wide basis, you'll see for the third year in a row, at least, there's been a positive change in the net position of the city. That was an increase of roughly $4.8 million, which increases the total net position to $199 million for the year. And I do have a couple slides that walk through the entity-wide numbers as well. And we had no audit adjustments through the process. And as I also alluded to, the single audit had no reportable findings this year. Slide 9 just shows a picture of our risk-based audit approach and the phases of the audit, which a couple of the key phases I just want to highlight that's important in this process is one is we look at the control environment that the city operates in as it relates to the financial statements. And there's 5 interrelated components. There's the control environment, risk assessment, information and communication, control activities and monitoring, and in each of those areas, we concluded that the environment was effective for the period under audit. As well as we assess the key processes that affect the financial statements. We look at treasury, which includes bank reconciliations. It includes looking at investment reconciliations. We look at estimates within the financial statements, the timeliness and accuracy of the financial reporting and closing the books. We look at the expenditure and the disbursement cycle, as well as payroll, revenue, and fixed assets. In all those areas, we concluded that the process was both designed and operating effectively for the year-end audit. Just at a high level, you'll see I included a slide of the a 3-year comparison of both the governmental activities, which includes the general fund, it includes debt and fixed assets as well as all the business type activities. You'll see the total assets for the governmental activities was at $120 million for the year, compared to liabilities of roughly $93 million, which leads to a positive net position for the governmental activities of roughly $30 million. For the business type activities, there was total assets of $245 million compared to liabilities of $70 million, which left a positive net position of $169 million for the business type activities. On the statement of activities, which includes all revenues and expenses of the city, for the governmental activities, revenues increased to $51.6 million for the fiscal year compared to total expenses of $49.1 million. And then in the business type activities, there was gross revenue of $56.3 million compared to $54 million of expenses for the period. So it was a positive change in net position for both types of activities this year. From a single audit perspective, we're required to follow a federally mandated risk assessment process. This year, the major single audit program was the Community Development Block Grant. That represents approximately 82% of the entire schedule of federal awards, so it's well in excess of the minimum requirement of 20% coverage that the federal government set. So there's clearly a high level of coverage through testing that program. Typically, that's the major program. There aren't too many material other programs that we'd be required to test on an annual basis that the city receives. But you'll see the remaining programs represent roughly $300,000. Basically the difference between the total and the CDBG grant. So as I said, we're planning to issue a clean opinion on the single audit. Then lastly, I won't go through each one of these points. I know it's way too small to read on the screen, but if we had difficulties getting through the audit, as I mentioned at the beginning, if we had found fraud, if we had material weaknesses or audit entries, we'd be required to bring that to the council's attention. If there were disagreements we had, if there were unsupported transactions that we identified through the audit, I'd be required to bring that to your attention. So there's really nothing of a negative nature to report. Really, the only item left is there's a management representation letter that we'll have Michelle sign prior to issuing the single audit. And then once the single audit's issued, we will complete the data collection form, which will then let the Federal Audit Clearinghouse know that single audit has been submitted and issued on a timely basis. So that's really that's all that's left from our perspective for this year's audit. Are there any
Any
questions?
questions?
No, thank you very much. Thank you. Very good, thank you. Good point.
Oh, thank you. I try.
All right,
Okay.
thank you, guys.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, great job.
And thank Jonathan Kearns, because he, for the past 2 years, has been the primary focus of the federal single audit. And that's no fun place to be,
Guess you'll be getting another award
tell
of
you.
some sort.
Yeah, well, he knows it's coming.
Don't let his ego get too big.
All right, the proposed community development block grant action plan amendment for reallocation of fiscal year 20 CDBG funds.
Good afternoon. Every year, periodically throughout the year, we always take a look at our CDBG budget in keeping with the federal regulations, making sure we're keeping up with the timely expenditures of CDBG funding. We have identified some areas in the CDBG budget that could look at possible reallocation of funding. Once again, keeping in mind that we're trying to focus on projects that are shovel-ready or quick to be undertaken. And Rodney is here to maybe assist with some of these projects that we're proposing reallocation of fiscal year 20 funding through the CDBG budget. In the memo, we had described a couple activities through our CDBG budget that would be neighborhood parks and public facility loans. And we have some opportunities there to look at shifting some of that funding within the budget. Main project in the neighborhood parks item that we're looking at is CDBG funding that we had budgeted in fiscal year 20 that was looked at for maybe a splash pad park. And I think we are working with Rodney on the timing of a splash pad park project. And I know there's still conceptual and planning considerations that likely would push a splash pad park project into fiscal year 21. And Rodney can talk a little bit more about that. And we also had a public facility loan line item that we were maybe anticipating an eligible public facility loan application coming in way back during the CDBG application process last December, but that looks like there would be no eligible public facility loan projects in fiscal year 20. So we have some recommended reallocations for some of this available funding. And I think, one, we want to keep in mind that we're not trying to pull away from a splash pad park project altogether. We can continue to look maybe at fiscal year 21's budget, depending on where the CDBG budget lands for the upcoming fiscal year. And we have some opportunities to shift some funding away from a city park parking lot project that could likely go towards Vesa Boulevard. That would be state funding that would be available. And Rodney can once again elaborate on that a little more. So Rodney, if you want to talk a little more about the splash pad project, the timeline, and the funding amounts involved, and then also the city park reconstruction and how there would maybe be a funding swap with state aid funding for that project, and then also some of the other projects with the Medal of Honor.
Yeah, I think the splash pad, we all agreed it was a good project. I guess the problem is location and timing. I think the direction I was given was to talk to the housing authority about placing it along the cultural trail, and they have turned that down. So the location that's left is on the north side of Baltimore Street, which is also being looked at for the baseball stadium. So at this point, I really don't have a place to put it or a timeline to do it. So I know it's a problem with CDBG funds, just to let them languish. So that's why, one reason why we're proposing to take this year's allocation and move it to something else, and then appropriately budget for that in next year's budget for the splash pad. City Park parking lot is up on the top of the hill by the Mansion House. It's a $250,000 project. It was going to be half funded by CDBG and half funded by state aid. The state aid money we could use to do some work on Vesa Boulevard to make improvements out there in conjunction with some development that's going to occur out there. And then Jonathan would fund the parking lot fully with CDBG funds. That's the proposal. And then some of the other projects that we could do, one was been suggested to us by Neighborhood First Group, is to put a traffic signal at the Mitchell overpass rather than the place where everybody honks their horn. And the volume of traffic there is fairly high. It's surprising if you stand there very long how much traffic goes through there. A traffic signal would probably modernize that along with cleaning it up a little bit by improving the lighting, possibly painting the walls, just making it a nicer appearance. The other thing is we could use a little bit more money, maybe another $25,000 towards the Medal of Honor triangle. We're going to spruce that up and improve the memorials and things that are there. We bid it last year and only had one bid, and I want to rebid it here soon, but I think I need a little bit more money in the budget to make that happen. That's our suggestions.
I think they're great suggestions, and I support them.
Anybody have any for? Okay. Sounds like a good suggestion.
And one clarification, in my memo, I had mentioned we would look for an amendment for our CDBG program to be December regular session. That'll actually be January. We have some public notice requirements with CDBG that'll take 30 days. So we would have an actual amendment in January for this reallocation of the CDBG funds for the new activities.
Cool. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Proposed CDBG action, update next steps of vacant, abandoned, cyclical tax sale properties initiative. We'll shorten that up a little bit.
Thank Jen Kiefer, our city attorney, for being here as well to discuss our update and hopefully our planned next steps for implementing a program to help alleviate some of these vacant, abandoned tax sale properties in the city of Hagerstown. And one item I'd like to clarify, we get lists each year from Todd Hershey, County Treasurer, on properties that go through the tax sale process that receive no bids. And I believe this year the list was about 60 properties. Not all 60 of those properties are major blight problems, properties that we probably would be wanting to target for such an initiative. Some of those properties could be maybe the first time they've been on a delinquent tax sale list. They've went to tax sale. Some of the taxes may be $1,000 or less. We've narrowed an approximate list down to about 46 properties, give or take, where taxes are in excess of $5,000 to $10,000 of delinquent city taxes. And I'd say probably about half of those are problem properties, give or take. And we can continue to refine that list. It's always fluid because it seems like the tax sale list from Todd every year, it changes depending on his cycle, and if a property maybe in a previous year had received an actual bid at tax sale, it gets removed from the list for the next year, and it's stuck for possibly 2 years if nobody decides to move forward with a foreclosure. So I wanted to clarify, I know we've talked about lists before and numbers. So any given year it changes, but it has seemingly increased over the years with the number of the problem blighted properties on that list. And once again, going back to previous discussions, we've tried to look at this as maybe being a pilot program to maybe try to tackle 3 to 5 properties on a pilot basis. And another item to clarify, just to give the mayor and city council reassurance, we presented a few properties as examples on slides in different presentations, and we're unaware that none of those properties at any time have moved. I think there was some confusion previously about slides that maybe have been sold, but that's not the case. None of the properties that we've been focused on have been sold. They're still in arrears. They're still listed as the previous owner of record. So I want to thank Jen Kiefer. She's been helping with this initiative for a while, and we continue to lean on the Dorchester County process that's already up and running. The complexity for us in implementing a program, the way we presented it is we've tried to set up a process to solicit potential new buyers or new end users on the front end. So we're trying to, in essence, sell properties that we don't even have any ownership of. So that's going to be a bit unique, but the way we've tried to put that together is develop a process where we, at first, at the staff level, identify some properties that we want to target to move through this program. We would have a consultation with mayor and council to discuss those properties in particular, look at the tax amounts that are in question, and then with mayor and council approval, from there we'd begin soliciting end users. And the way we've set up the concept is we would have end users being identified at first through a nonprofit basis. Once again, that's modeled after Dorchester County's program, and I believe there's also state legislation that gives us some flexibility when we're targeting the nonprofit initiatives for affordable housing that allows donation or sale of those properties maybe for $1 to these nonprofit organizations that would likely be able to find reoccupancy and reuse of the properties in question. From there, if we have no success in maybe finding a nonprofit, we could look at an RFP type process that would maybe open it up to all potential private development. And then there's a caveat, there's certain properties in this scenario that are vacant lots, you can't build on them, they're probably never be able to be developed in any way. Sometimes the only thing we think of that would make sense for those properties is looking for an adjacent property owner, or maybe, if possible, maybe somebody in that local area of that property that would maybe use it for parking or something like that. So we have an aspect of the process for vacant lots that you can't build on, you can't develop, to actually just see if there's a more informal outreach to adjacent property owners to see if they would be interested. With that said, I'm going to let Jen maybe answer some questions, if there's any questions from a legal perspective. I know we have two different steps that we were looking to take with the process. There would be a city code amendment and then an actual guideline adoption through an ordinance. And Jen, I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit. The documents are similar. The guidelines go a little more in depth. And then we wanted to give the mayor and city council an opportunity to provide feedback on the documents or the process. At this time, it was more of a fluid working document, and then our goal would be to hopefully work out any kinks, come back in January, have everything introduced and then adopted in January, and then after everything becomes effective, hopefully get it up and running, would be probably around the 1st of March.
Has the county been agreeable?
Aside from, we haven't had any formal conversations other than our discussions at the joint session.
Okay.
I think our goal would be, as part of the process, once we consult with mayor and council, we could then alert the county to say, these are the properties we're targeting. I know their tax amounts are much lower compared to the city tax amounts. One other thing I wanted to point out, part of the process, we have a note about properties that may need demolished. And what staff has discussed and what we recommend, and once again, we'll welcome feedback on it, is we have a handful of these properties that we think just need demolished. We have in the process that we would solicit maybe an end user for such a property that would be likely a buildable lot. But we were recommending maybe looking with our CDBG resources or our resources through planning and code, that the city would, if we're involved in a property that needs demolished, that we would just demolish it while under a city ownership if we're foreclosing, rather than maybe risk that we buy it and something falls through, we sell it to or transfer the ownership to an entity and something happens and it still stays there and it's not demolished. We would recommend that we intervene if we're going through the process of tax foreclosure to gain ownership, that we would demolish it at that time, and then after demolition, then hopefully flip it to that nonprofit or private end user from there. So that's one other thing to highlight that I didn't mention.
Are you looking for questions from us?
Sure.
I just have a couple of comments, maybe. And I think it's easier for me to go off the bullet points at the moment.
Sure.
So, one of the, and my comments are more of a timing issue. So, just to be clear, bullet point number 2, city staff and legal counsel will work to ensure targeted properties are not in the process of sale or foreclosure. So if they're any process of foreclosure, but they've been on the tax, if they've been on, you know, for sale, or the tax sale a couple of times, what is in the process, I understand sale, what's in the process of foreclosure mean?
I think we have certain properties that maybe are on the no bid list at times, but I guess that would be, it wouldn't be on the no bid list if it maybe got a tax sale bid. So we're just trying to, I guess, with that statement to say, if something has maybe been in the tax sale process years and years and years, but it maybe caught a bid one year, we can't look at it if it's maybe subject to a tax sale foreclosure by that bidder. I guess the other aspect of it, maybe Jen can touch on it. I don't know what other term to use other than maybe it would be a minor miracle that one of these properties has a third party involved, and maybe we just do a quick title search or something to verify that it doesn't have a foreclosure action that's being undertaken. And usually there's either a district court search or maybe another search that, that somebody could assist with that. So we're just trying to, I guess, make a statement there to clarify that we're not trying to intervene in a property that's maybe already in a foreclosure process.
Okay.
This may also go to satisfy the county's concern that they thought that there were a couple of the properties that were already in a foreclosure or potential sale situation. Just for their reassurance that we will guarantee that's not the case.
So as long as a bank or lender is formally entered into a foreclosure process with the property owner, that would not be one that we would pursue.
That's correct.
Because the expectation is that the lender
Would
would
pay
then
off the
do
taxes.
something with it.
We wouldn't get those anyway because those wouldn't show up as no bids.
Okay.
And come back to us, so
right.
that wouldn't, there'd be a clear separation.
So the second is, property's got a buildable lot, unbuildable vacant lot with structures requires demolition, lot structure. Okay. The city seeks adjacent property owners for unbuildable vacant lots. The only thing I would add there is, well, two things. One is, I think that the only circumstance I would want to relinquish a lot to a vacant lot or an unbuildable lot to an adjoining property owner. And for me, I don't really care that it's unbuildable. I mean, I think that term is fairly limited. To me, if there's a vacant lot and there's no interest in it, I don't see any benefit to us sitting on it, whether it's buildable or not, versus providing it to an adjacent property owner, under two conditions. One is, I would think that we would want them to make it part of their lot. At least within some specific time frame. And the second is, I wouldn't have any great interest in going to the block or across the street and saying, hey, do you want it, do you want it, do you want it? For me, the only way I would relinquish that property is if the directly adjoining property owner wants it and is gonna make it part of their lot. Because then I think it removes some of that speculation.
Understand.
I'd rather hold it and put it on our, especially if it's a buildable lot, and hold it and put it on our, competitive, negotiated sale process. And that's both for the demolition and unbuildable and buildable lots. All three of them sort of fit under the same category for me. Is there a specific reason, other than we've talked about it, that we would, I got two questions here, that we would seek out a nonprofit organization first before a private development entity? Because I know that there are clearly interests within the business community of us making that a higher, higher on the pecking order, so to speak, of opportunity. Is that simply because that's what we've said to date?
I think one, in all honesty, we modeled it after Dorchester County's
Okay.
process, so that was kind of their first step. And it seemed like it may be more tied also to the state legislation. It seems like there's flexibility in, it was House Bill 950, Senate Bill 951 from 2018 that provides, I think, that ability to donate or provide those properties for $1 to nonprofits for affordable housing. Whereas
Okay.
the private side, I think it's going to be more difficult, and I think part of the language we have in for the private RFP is we think some of these properties have a value. It's just certainly some properties we're not going to look at and say, well, it's got $90,000 of
Right.
tax liens. It's clearly not worth that, but some of the buildings may be a market of $25,000, $30,000. So
So are we gonna set a time frame on that? In other words,
how
I don't
long
want
do
it to
we?
be like when we had the home store where, we now have a couple of places that are sitting, you know what I mean? On our dime, so to speak, 4 and 5 and 6 years, waiting for a nonprofit. I would hope we'd say, look, after 12 months, if there's no nonprofit out there that wants it, then we can roll it out and it can be up for private,
Yeah,
competitive.
I think our vision is, we have, the way they've done it in Dorchester County, they have a very informal outreach with the nonprofit community. I think they even said that maybe they really only have Habitat for Humanity that's their ideal nonprofit for such initiatives. We have maybe a handful of nonprofits that could do rehab or building construction.
And I hear that we have that today before we've started this process. My concern, given the stock, frankly, that we have and the volume that we could experience as this rolls out, is that there's somebody out there is going to create the opportunity for themselves, you know what I mean, to become competitive on this list of opportunity that we would otherwise say, that's not. So I want to make sure we obviously have that autonomy to say that, number one, but number two, that there is some formal, criteria
Well,
that exists.
I think part of that, part of your concern can be addressed in criteria, eligibility for an end user, things like being in good standing with the city,
Right.
certainly the
Okay.
the property owner who has the delinquent tax bill would not be eligible. We've also included in that, if they have any delinquent property taxes, they would not be eligible. So that's one part. The other part too, I think, could be addressed through the policy and the specific criteria that the DCED review committee would be considering if they get interest from multiple potential end users. As far as a time frame, what we have built in here is a pretty quick turnaround, and I don't know, I think I like it. I don't know if it's realistic, but there would be a 45-day application period, and
Okay.
then, or whatever that application period is. I think if there's no interest or no interest from a qualified nonprofit, we would move to the second option. That's the way it's structured right now.
So I would envision, when you say that, I would envision it working then very similar to like the first third program, where we have established criteria there of good standing and things like that, and then we get the vet. There's an appropriate committee to do so. Okay. The other item I had was, where did I see it in here? It talks okay, as previously discussed, staff are recommending the program begin on a pilot basis. And I guess here's where I may have a difference of opinion, where it said this would target a small number of vacant, abandoned, cyclical tax sale properties with a high probability of successful resale and reuse. I mean, I get the impetus for kind of looking at, okay, let's cherry pick the ones that may be able to turn around the quickest. But I guess I look at it and go back to the conversation we had when we had the joint meeting, is I would much rather see us put the ones that we have an awareness of in these categories of high probability, needs demolished, can be flipped to an adjacent property owner fairly quickly. And then, for me, I would rather say, okay, these are our, 4 or 5 categories of properties out of, let's say there's 100, and let's say that there's 25 in each of those 4 categories. I'd rather be able to go through, and I get the point of the pilot basis of getting them, but I would assume, given that there's a finite number and that we have a great awareness of which those are and who owns them, and even probably to some degree the contact information that we have, of being able to reach out in some fashion proactively. And if somebody's ready to come off of a property in a fairly quick mode, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter to me so much that it's highly, resellable. If one is a detriment or to a neighborhood, and, Mr. Smith owns it and says, hey, man, yeah, you can have it, I don't want us to sort of wait on that one because we've established this criteria that we're gonna go after the resellable ones. I'd rather say, okay, they're all in these categories, and then within these 4 categories, we start contacting and say, okay, we can do these 8 because these 8 owners have responded and says, yes, please take this off my plate, the sooner the better. And just get them moving. I think if we do it the other way, we may get hung up, especially if we're going after the ones that are most flippable, so to speak. I think those would be the ones that we may get into some longer periods of hang-up with. And I wouldn't want to get hung up on the energy spent on just those when we could be looking at these other categories, making those proactive contacts and saying, okay, you know, Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones and, you know, and Mrs. Jennings, these 3 are ready to go because they've said, yeah, let's get this done, and get those balls moving. I realize the other side of that is that you can't do 80 of them at once, you know what I mean? But if there's 8 of them that want to be fairly quick turnarounds, to me, it wouldn't matter whether they're demos or, because to me, I look at demos as almost like a higher priority because they're sitting there in a neglected state. They're sitting there in an abandoned state. They're sitting there in a safety issue state, and they're doing nothing but creating a detriment to that neighborhood. You know what I mean? And the tax base and the surrounding properties. The sooner we get those gone, you know, the better.
And that was just our recommendation, but we certainly have in the process, the very first step is essentially categorization by staff and then coming to mayor and council to consult before we move forward with any of them, so we can
I think it was more of a proof of process.
Yeah.
To start out with a couple to make sure that we had everything, and we had the staff that, you know, we weren't overwhelming staff, you know, not being the first time we'd done this before. But I agree with you that if we have a block of these, that we could unload fairly quickly, let's get rid of them.
Right. I know in the Frederick process, as I've used before, when they did those identifications, there were like 17 of them that people came forward and said, hey, yes, please take this. You know, I don't want it, or please take it, I didn't even know I owned it, or please take it, I'm not going to do anything with it. Those are the ones I'd like to, you know, the ones that want to move quickly are the ones we should.
And
move quickly with.
we've had interest from, Joey has had, and I think you attended one of the meetings on, with some of the social agencies regarding the homeless and the shelters and whatnot, that there's some considerable interest in looking at some of these and how they could be used in that aspect, and things we talked about earlier as well. So that has kind of at least piqued my motivation to try to move more of these if we can move them, and then go to the next level, which is those that aren't in tax sale limbo, but those that are vacant blighted, that are constant nuisances, and finding ways to get those back in a productive state. So well, that's certainly something we'll look at when we develop this list, and I think maybe we try to go with more properties.
Yeah, and we're willing to look at that, and I think,
Yeah.
once again, the way we have the process, at least the concept built, is mayor and council, mayor and city council, we have the initial look, and here's the ones we're gonna try to move. We'll make sure the mayor and council are good with that, and then ultimately, whoever the end user would be, recommended, the mayor and city council would have that final discretion as well.
Just one quick question. From a legal standpoint, we're saying we're going to forgive delinquent city and hopefully county taxes, but the former owner of record will still remain liable for that. If we've forgiven the tax, how are they still liable?
We have the authority under state code to continue to hold them accountable, and most likely that would look like obtaining a judgment against them.
Maybe a better term instead of forgiving is the taxes are.
Reducing the.
Yeah, and/or the lien itself.
Abate the abatement.
Yeah, the lien, the tax lien itself is taken out of the picture to transfer to new owner, but previous owner remains liable. So maybe that would be a better choice of words, I guess. And I think maybe I'd probably use the word forgive in
Yeah,
the
so it's like,
documentation.
if you forgive it. how do
Yeah.
you-
So to clarify, we're definitely not wanting to forgive. As Jen mentioned, it says it actually in, once again, I'm referencing Senate Bill 951 for some of the tax sale legislation that went through 2018 General Assembly, it distinctly says we have that authority to continue to hold that previous owner or the owner of record that was delinquent accountable. And then it would be more of taking away the tax lien from the property so somebody could buy with clear title.
So, I'm confused now. Let's say somebody comes in, let's say you have these categories, and somebody has a piece of property, and you say, hey, you know, we're pressing this issue, you know, you're the owner, and it's got $10,000 against it, you know, you haven't paid the taxes, it just keeps going through the cycle. And they say, please, you know, take it. Are you saying that we would then come back and say, okay, we're going to take it, thank you for offering it, by the way, you still owe us 10 grand?
Well, that may be something, or another facet of this program that we want to consider, is if we want to approach the owner and get some sort of consent or work with them, then we may need to offer some incentive there. But if we have
And I thought that was the
um,
point of the consent.
some of these, our program doesn't really have a consent component to it. I mean, some of these owners are deceased, and if there are any heirs, they've absconded. Some are just absentee owners.
Well, I guess that's what I'm getting at, is I want to make sure I understand this clearly. If, let's say there's 100 properties, and let's say that there's 20 of them. Let's say, yes, my mom owned that, you know, she's deceased, or, you know, that was left to me in some, you know, estate, whatever. And they say, you know, yes, I'm aware that I own this, I'm aware it goes to tax sale, you know, I have no interest in it. You know, it's been in this process for 7 years. And yeah, I'm aware that somebody says I owe, you know, $13,000, you know, just take the property. I would hope that we would have some mechanism here where we would say, oh, you're voluntarily offering it, okay, then there is no $13,000. I guess I kind of thought that was some of the premise we were working from here, is that if somebody offers up their property,
Wouldn't we want to do that as
We're
long as
not.
they relinquished any right to come back through the process and sue or some legal action to try to
Right.
get that property back? To me, I think what we were looking to do as far as the forgiveness of the taxes is that once we did that and then we went into a process of moving that property, that owner who has let that accumulate would come back and say, oh, hey, I want that property back now. You've already abated, you know, all the taxes. Now I get it back.
yeah, I thought that's how I read your
Right.
question, and here was, we want you to know we're going to hold this until process is done. I read this to mean, you owe us the 12 grand until we're free and clear, and then you're gonna get a letter from us saying, you don't owe us the 12 grand anymore. And by the way, you can't reacquire the property.
Yeah, I don't,
I think it just would depend on the scenario with the property. I think some of the property owners, I don't think we're gonna have any voluntary
Oh, I
action.
agree, I
So-
agree.
so-
I'm saying I wanna make sure we have that option.
right.
That-
We
no,
we
we
just
hadn't-
don't want them to come back and be able to claim title to it after we've wiped everything off. And then
Right.
say, hey, thanks for wiping out my 100 grand. I want my property back.
But if somebody willingly
But I-
offers it up,
yeah.
I definitely want the
I
ability
see
to
what
say,
you,
hey,
we can
Yeah.
maybe add a facet that.
If somebody wants to just say, here, take it,
If there's
then we'll say, well,
cooperation-
thank you very much, but now you've relinquished any opportunity to get that property back, sue us, that we've done, you know.
As a
protect
condition of
ourselves.
us waiving
As a condition
these,
of us waiving those fees.
which will be
Yeah,
waived in final once
That's
we're
correct.
free and clear on the
That's correct.
title.
That's correct.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay. Sounds like we're getting there.
We'll make some updates, and then maybe back one more time in January, and I think we were targeting the second to last, or the last work session of the month for introduction of code amendment, introduction of ordinance, and then regular session would be approval of code amendment and approval of ordinance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. City Administrator.
And just thank John and Paul Falk and Jen for all the work they've done on this. This, like I said, we started working on this 8 years ago. And now we finally got a legislative environment and cooperation. I think this could end up being a very positive step towards helping reclaim some of these neighborhoods, getting rid of some of these blighted chronic tech sale. The only other thing I have, Mayor, is I want to thank the Parks and Rec staff for just the tremendous work they've done at City Park for this holiday season. The tree lighting and the new coordinated holiday display at City Park is amazing. And we've been there every night since Friday night because the grandkids like to go and watch it. And so we sit in the parking lot and enjoy it. And along with about average 15 to 20 other cars that sit in that parking lot and watch it. Just want to remind folks that we've got signs up on Virginia Avenue. The hours are dusk until 9 o'clock to watch the display. After that, it's still very pretty. It's white lights and you just don't hear the music and you don't see the show. So that's from dusk until 9 every night of the week through the holiday season. Thank you.
Lou?
Nothing tonight, thank you, Mayor.
Austin?
I just want to say, I attended the Dolman Museum opening on Saturday. It was a great turnout for it. I was very pleased to see all the people there. They have their collection, a very small part of the collection displayed, but it's well worth seeing, and it's free admission, and I encourage everybody to go. On another note, it became very, very evident to me this weekend that we need to do something about the lack of restroom facilities for the homeless. Once again, in the University Deck parking garage, going down the stairwell, had to hold your nose going down because somebody used the stairwell for a bathroom facility. I think we're doing such a fantastic job in this city. All the nonprofits, all the social service agencies, we have food available at church after church after church, food banks. We have warming shelters. We have all these facilities that people are doing a great job trying to take care of the less fortunate. Why doesn't somebody build them a bathroom? We've got to. I've never seen this problem in a city center, in the core downtown area. I've never seen this before in any city in the world. I've seen it, when I was in a section of town I shouldn't have been in a parking garage or something, but not in the pristine core center of the city. And the difference is, all these cities have public restrooms, or there's some place a person can go. We've had, reports this week, or last week at the, about the problem in front of the Plum. The owners have to clean up the bushes every morning because there's excrement in there. M&T Bank, I know they had to take down their shrubs in front of the bank because every morning they would go open the bank and they had the same problem there. We've got to do something. And I think, there may be some opportunities with CDBG funding to do something to build a restroom facility. We've got, we've got a bus terminal. We've got a lot of low-income, moderate-income people that use public transportation. There's no restroom there. It is.
You're right, I agree with that.
And maybe, by using CDBG funding for some of the reconstruction, rebuilding of blighted buildings, if we could turn, a ground floor of one of those structures into a public restroom, I think it would help tremendously. We're spending so much time and energy and doing so many wonderful things downtown to attract people and bring people in, and that's the kind of thing, if you come from out of town and you want to go to an event and you take your family and you're going to the parking garage and down the stairs and you encounter that's you're not coming back. It's no fun.
Do we have cameras in those stairwells?
Don't know.
Yes.
So we can actually go through and see who is utilizing those as bathroom
Yeah.
facilities.
I agree, but the problem is, you know, if they, what
What do you do?
what do they do? Because,
Well,
you know,
what do
if
you do
you,
to them even if you find them?
yeah,
I mean,
Exactly, it
you take
doesn't
them-
solve the
You take them
problem.
to district court and there's no solution in the enforcement system.
plus if you, you know, put yourself in their situation, if you're out on the sidewalk, look at all the restaurants that say, you know, bathroom for patrons only, you know, no public restrooms on businesses. What are you gonna do? I mean, you have no choice. So,
Go somewhere.
gotta go someplace. And, you know, either the churches stop feeding them, or we give them a place to go to the bathroom, one or the other. It doesn't work both ways.
I think we all agree with that.
Well, not all of us, but okay. Kristen?
Well, I agree with Austin. I mean, I think that we need, I think we're smart enough and certainly have the resources enough to find a practical and appropriate solution to that. I use the example of Chincoteague Island when I go there. You know, there's a little like brick rancher style structure. And so I only say that if we're going to do that and head down that road, that it be some permanent structure, you know, that be appropriately maintained and you know, not of any type of portable nature. So I'm all for participating in that discussion and finding a solution, something that's permanent and long-term. And the other thing I'll say is, to Scott's comments, you know, when I went the other evening, I think there were like 40 cars there. And so, you know, when I saw the parking lot improvements on the agenda this evening, I was like, wow, you know, that's good timing, because there's definitely, with those, with that setup at the park, there's definitely a safety-oriented issue, because, you know, usually, first of all, you go back that street to the museum in general, and it's not really designated how you go back and how you come out, and, you know, all that great or well-lit to begin with. And so it's definitely, as the mayor points out from time to time, you know, it's always great to have a parking problem, because you know you're doing something that folks want to come to. So it's a good thing.
Can you find out if, I mean, we have a public restroom in this building that people utilize on the second floor during business hours. Does the county allow anyone to come into their building to use their restrooms downtown during business hours? Okay. All right. That's all I have. Thanks. See you next week.
I'm with Community Development Manager Jonathan Kearns. Jonathan, thanks for taking some time here after the meeting. Talked about those cyclical tax properties, and that's been something that's been a long time issue here in the city of Hagerstown. So for the average taxpayer out there, of which I'm one of those, why should I care about this? What does this mean to me?
That's a good question, Wes. I think one of the main problems and challenges with these cyclical tax sale properties, not all, but a good majority of them, they're blighted properties. They're vacant. Typically, they're abandoned by the owners. They tend to be a neighborhood nuisance. It's something that our code staff that are always involved with property cleanup or property security. You tend to attract problems at these properties with maybe people breaking in, illicit activity, and obviously we're trying to make sure our neighborhoods are safe, and we think getting these properties out of that state will improve the properties, improve the neighborhoods, not just the property itself, but maybe the surrounding properties around the properties in question.
I've had a couple of people say to me, well, if you demolish all of these properties, well, you don't get anything back on the tax rolls. And right now, obviously, we're not getting anything out of these properties anyway. So how do you kind of balance that in terms of if it comes down to demo in the end with some of these properties? Is it just that the benefit on the other side is the beautification and the safety for the neighborhood, something that doesn't exist there now with these properties in place?
Sure. I think, one, it's looking at the properties and analyzing each property individually. Some of them we think that are so far beyond repair that demolition is likely the only path forward. And clearly, I think in these scenarios, we would say that maybe generating tax payment or tax revenue from said property is not as important as safety, neighborhood appearance, and aesthetics, and certainly we'll take that into consideration on a case-by-case basis. And some of the properties we think definitely have potential to be rehabilitated and occupied, and once again be productive properties occupied by homeowners or renters. Once again, we think there's so many different options that are better than the status quo, and that's once again the end goal here: get them out of this cycle through the tax sale process, and either generating tax revenue, improving the neighborhood, reducing the nuisance calls to police and code enforcement. It seems like a no-brainer. We've said that many times, and that's the best way I could put it.
Yeah, and just from a personal standpoint, how frustrating has it been to see many of these properties just recur and recycle and be there and get no bids?
It's very frustrating, and once again, I mean, it's the impact of the neighborhoods that I think it's. The neighbors and the adjacent property owners beside these properties are bearing the brunt of the frustration. They have to see it every day. I mean, we go down the streets and our code staff monitor the properties, and we see them just continuing to decline. The maintenance obviously isn't being kept up because most of the times the owners have either walked away or maybe the owner is deceased, or there's some type of other ownership issue where there's no one involved anymore. So it's certainly frustrating for us, and it would be a relief if we can get these properties back once again into a productive use and contributing to the neighborhoods in a positive way. But once again, I think clearly the frustration's got to be higher on the side of the property owners that are in these neighborhoods seeing these properties on a day-by-day basis.
Yeah, without a doubt. And Councilmember Alshire had a few concerns with this, but obviously you're working with a model that's been in place for a little while in Dorchester County. This would be a pilot program here, but part of the reason that you want to take on just a few properties to begin with is to sort of get your feet wet with it and see how it does function here.
Definitely, and that's the same approach Dorchester County. They implemented their program and said they had to make a few tweaks here or there, and I think that's reasonable for us to take that same approach. We would once again dip our toe in the water. We may learn a few things through the process the first time around, and honestly, we need to assess feasibility, assess success. We don't want to say that we're going to be able to cure the problem right away in 1 year or 2 years. We have considerations of cost and timing and all the processes involved. So I think, yes, go into it with a pilot mindset, and if necessary, make needed changes. If not, continue the program, and once again, hopefully see the positive returns once it's up and running.
And after the discussion tonight, where do we go from here? Where do things stand at this point? How long until something like this could potentially be implemented?
That's a good question. Right now, the goal is to come back to the mayor and city council in January, introduce legislation. That would take a waiting period then to approval of the legislation, and then another waiting period until it will become effective. Right now, it looks like that would be around March 1st. And then once again, working closely with our staff, our city attorney, and also the county treasurer, and looking at probably springtime as getting this up and running and moving.
So it possibly could be in place then before the next tax sale would come up?
Correct.
Okay. And just one follow-up question, not necessarily on that, but in the comments that Councilman Heffernan had at the end, talking about the issue of people using the bathrooms downtown that don't exist at this point in time. There was a mention of CDBG funding potentially for that, and I know you are big on that as it relates to that. You know all the ins and outs of that. Is that something that could be a possibility?
It's something we are looking into. It would be something we've never done locally with our CDBG funding. Certainly can explore it. We work closely with our Housing and Urban Development representative who oversees our CDBG program, and we'll definitely look into that possibility and go from there.
All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate your time. And thanks to all of you for watching. We won't have another council wrap till after the new year. We've got just one more session remaining, regular session next week here at Council Chambers. So Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We'll see you in the new year on Council Wrap.